If I say something to you, I am using words to convey my idea, and the words I choose can often be the greatest obstacle to our communication. This is because we might view these word choices very differently. It's more complicated than agreeing on a common dictionary, as if we were beginning a game of Scrabble. You have a culture, a background, a perspective, and your perspective might result in you decoding a message that fails to resemble the idea that I was attempting to convey. As a result of this, we might tend to agree with people who share a similar background with us, or see the ideas of another culture as weird or nonsensical simply based on how we decode the message. Even with those from the same culture who seem just like ourselves, we may find very different pictures coming into mind based on our individual interpretations of the words we hear. So when we receive a message, we are forced to make a guess. We could judge the sender and look for things that we can attack in the message, or we could do the opposite. Our common dictionary won't help us with this emotional element either. So how do we really hear what someone is saying? By lowering our guards to the message. By choosing on the outset to try our best at being open as opposed to rushing to judgment. By trying to hear the message instead of the words. By choosing to have a little faith in the sender. At the end of the day, nobody is forcing an opinion. So it doesn't hurt to hear someone out. You don't have to change your mind. But how do you know what you think if you are blocked and guarded against even really hearing a message? When a person is closed off to different viewpoints, it limits the ability to grow more wise. In this case, the listener can only communicate with like-minded individuals, people who share a common background. As your viewpoint changes with time, your personal definitions might drift from those commonly used. This is especially true in our world today, a world in which many people almost exclusively communicate to a group of friends and colleagues. Isolated from the larger community, we hear filtered, persuasive news and descriptions of the world which are tailored to manipulate more than inform. As our personal definitions drift apart, we become more isolated from those who are different, less able to hear their messages, less able to evolve. This drift is okay though, I think. It's unavoidable, an aspect of our individual perspective, which changes with us over time. And we will all change over time, for better or worse. No, it's the disruption of communication caused by this drift that's the problem. But we control that, because we can choose the more difficult task of trying to hear the message instead of the words. If I were to say something were good or evil, what does that mean to you? There was a time when I took a hero-villain picture of good and evil. In this typical view, that I seem to have passively absorbed from my society, the good are selfless and sacrificial, they do no harm, the bad ones are greedy and sadistic. From this vantage, God would fit into the picture as an all-knowing, man-like creature that's constantly watching me in order to judge which one I will become. And the devil, a goat-like entity bent on tricking me into becoming the evil villain. Well, that all sounds pretty mythological. And it should, right? My society also taught me to attack a claim always, and see how well it holds up under scrutiny. As a skeptic, I never spent too much time thinking about these outdated concepts of good and evil. Over time, however, some things caused me to drift away from that societal default setting. I kept seeing how emotional and self-centered humans seem to be. They live as animals, simply responding to base desires, living in the moment. Humans are not an example for proper living, I thought. Instead, I turned to nature. The laws of nature don't change with time. They are constant. They can always be relied upon. And nature is perfectly fair. It gives no advantage to anyone for any reason. Where we humans perceive this cold unfairness, there exists in nature a perfect fairness. There seems to be a timeless wisdom in nature. It's much better to follow the example of nature than the selfish, emotional, short-lived trends of these humans, I thought. So as I went in this direction, I soon discovered that this left me with no gods, no devils, and pretty much no concept of good or evil. But to do the right thing is to do a good thing. At least, I need a concept of good. So what is good? Well, if I were to determine that a behavior is desirable, then that behavior is good, right? So, okay, what's desirable then? Well, things that make the world a better place. I mean, those are our options, right? We can either make the world better or make it worse, or maybe just act like an inanimate object taking up space and influencing nothing. Alright, so what is better and what is worse? Improving the world? Ending hunger and the like? Trouble is, we humans can't seem to work together to accomplish these things. I wonder why. It gets hard to answer that question if there are no heroes and no villains, no them to blame for things. It seems that we, each of us, is both a hero and a villain. We have this desire to perfect the world, but also this emotional self-interest. And this duality carries on beyond us. We're a part of nature, and this duality seems built into our nature. Looking out into the world, it seems to me that there are natural forces that drive us towards perfection, and those that drive us away. I began to seek words to describe these things. And good and evil re-entered my vocabulary as a shortcut to describing the detail involved in reality. Something like cancer is incredibly complicated and not fully understood, but with my new view of these words, evil does a great job of describing cancer when the details are not necessary. When the speaker is simply describing cancer as something that doesn't make the world a better place. And then the concept of the devil became useful as a shortcut to describing sort of the sum of forces that brings about these evils. God, a shortcut to describing an authority that everything in nature obeys. From this point of view, I realized that in ancient times these concepts might have arisen from a thought process similar to the one that I just had. I thought, maybe our ancestors weren't talking about some kind of silly nonsense when they spoke of good, evil, gods, and devils. Instead, maybe these words were being used as shortcuts for describing the same things we see in our world today. And now, I realize this means my previous perception of nature being good and humans not being good was totally wrong. No, it seems that when I use these words in this new way, that good and evil are basic ingredients of the universe. It's a new way to me, but maybe it's actually an old way. The duality we see in ourselves reflects that we're of nature, a part of it, not apart from it, like we like to see ourselves. We're both good and evil because nature itself is both good and evil. Now I find myself using these words all the time, and I'm not so quick to judge those from the past who describe things as evil or from the devil. Finally, I've found out that every person believes in God if defined in a certain way. So the question really isn't in belief, it's in the definition. I know personally that letting go of what our modern secular society has taught me these words mean, coming to my own conclusions, has allowed me access to wisdom that was previously off limits, closed off by my own refusal to see the message for the words.